So let's just sink into our seat. And we're just going to kind of let the day fall off of us. I have a feeling this is going to be a sparsely attended class tonight. Don't know why, but it's all good. Different people bring out different teachings anyways. So let's just start to sink into our breath. And just cease the constant reaching outside of this moment. Just contain yourself here and now. For those of you who just popped on, we're just getting started. And we're just sinking into our chairs. And just getting ready. Just make sure you're there in your body, in the room that you're in. Let your senses take in the entire room all at once. And just be here as you breathe. For anyone watching this video afterwards, the way we meditate is we place our attention high at our forehead and crown. We let our eyes fall to a spot on the floor, and we begin to watch our breath. As we breathe in, we are 100% given to the watching of the breath. As we breathe out, we are riding that breath all the way down. And we're paying such close attention that we even start to notice these little spaces in between the breaths. And what's special about that is not the breath. What's special about that is not even the concentration. What's special about that is that for a period of time, you're focusing on something completely other than yourself. Your attention is 100% off of your personal story. And this gives you the opportunity to see who you are outside of that. So for now, let's just practice meditation. Attention high in the body. Eyes at a spot on the floor or the desk in front of you, just to get them out of the way, but we're going to keep them open because you live with your life open, and we don't want this to be separate from the life that you're living. And then just become a wholehearted watcher of the breath. Breathe in, breathe out, and when the mind comes in to take you away, just return to the breath. Let's do this for a while and then we'll talk. Nothing to understand, nothing to correct. Just breathe in, breathe out, and nothing else. Let the body be the body. Let the feelings be the feelings. You just be the watcher of your breath. It's funny, there's this teaching that is coming forward And I keep pushing it away because it seems like such a beginner teaching for what I consider to be a fairly advanced group of meditators. But there must be something in it that someone needs to hear. And it never hurts to hear the foundation again. I'm not sure which thread to pull. Every human being has a very specific power, very, very specific to our level of consciousness. And it's the power to identify with things. It's that sense of self. But you know, there's that sense of self with a capital S, and there's that sense of self with a lowercase s. And most of us, even though we spend a lot of time in our capital S self, we all have lowercase s selves as well. You know, we are husbands and wives and teachers and students. We are parents. We are victims, maybe victimizers at times. You know, it's funny how little credence, well, that's not the right word. It's funny how flimsy the system of things you can identify with are. And yet, once you are identified, they rule your entire world. You know, you start off as this pure I am, period. I am without a definition. You know, you start off as that pure beingness that you learn to come back to in meditation. That experience of comfort, that's what that is. All of a sudden, when meditation starts feeling good and you're suddenly like, oh, I remember why I come to these classes, you've hit that beingness place. I'd like to think most of you get there at least at some point in every session. But once you once you finish that sentence, I am a woman. I am a man. I am, and then pick an adjective. A selfish man. I am a kind man. You start to collect a story. You just start linking these little stories onto that sense of beingness and identifying with them. You start using your power to identify to finish that sentence. That I am sentence. It starts when you're a child. And at first, you very quickly collect a system of stories, mostly around things you like and around things you don't like. And then after a while, those things you don't like start to have more complicated stories around them because you start to wonder what it means about you that this thing you don't like happened to you. Or you start defining yourself as the opposite of the things you've defined in your world that you don't like, but it becomes this mess of identifications, a complicated system of little micro identifications that usually a term I use for that is stories. You just start collecting stories, stories about yourself, stories about life. And you know what? You're mostly still happy because, you usually don't try to collect stories that are going to make you miserable. And as a child, if something's making you miserable, you scream until it goes away or until someone does something about it. But, we keep going and we keep collecting stories. You know, a long time ago, before I was vegan, I used to drink kefir. I loved it. And I used to make my own. And, I'd have these kefir strains, or kefir, some people say. And, you could use them batch after batch after batch. But, every now and again, people would tell you, oh, well, trade out your strains or do something new. The idea was, and I don't even know if this is true, but the idea was that, the strains are reproducing themselves over and over again, and eventually things can go off kilter, and so you might just get a different kind of bacterial composition or something, and the kefir might go in a direction you don't like. And your stories are kind of like that. You start to collect these stories and these systems of identification, but it just goes on and on and on. And every little iteration, every year they change just a little bit. The person you are now could barely relate to the child you were when you first started collecting these stories. And eventually, the stories just take a turn for most people, where having them becomes less of an opportunity to play and be a part of joy, and more they just become sort of a prison that defines all the limitations of your life. It's like you start to just become a bad batch of kefir. But the thing is, I don't know many people that this hasn't happened to. It happens to just about everyone. And you start to feel very, very limited. And you forget that it all really began as play. It all really began as you just trying on different roles that you saw in the world around you. Taking on little lessons from your parents and teachers, just to see what it felt like wearing that. But it's like at some point you had to start doubling down on it, and you had to start really committing. And it trapped you into this web. And it's intricate, It's not just as simple as the stories you carry, because you've got an entire drama in your life, and you actually cast other people into roles in that drama. So every drama has a villain, every drama has a hero, every drama has a lover, every drama has, all the different archetypes that you grew up seeing around you. And you are cast in other people's dramas, and you play a role in their life. And, that's one of the things. If you don't believe me, try changing your role. If you don't believe me, figure out what somebody has come to expect from you and stop meeting their expectations. And you'll see very quickly that you were playing a pivotal role in a system of stories that they had become very identified with. And they'll actually usually get very upset with you when you start to genuinely change how you relate to the world around you. It's funny when you really start giving yourself to meditation, how some of your friends start to fall away. Just because being around you feels different. You become less suited to their personal storylines and more suited to the storylines of others. And whether you can see it or not at the time, that's almost always a good thing. But so this power to identify yourself with things it's a blessing and a curse. It has a purpose. It's supposed to be there. It's not like a mistake of life. Its purpose is to engender empathy. Its purpose is to make it so that when you are speaking to someone else, you're seeing things you can relate to. And so there's a sense of identification with what another person is going through. It's actually the foundation of communication. Communication is much more than words. Think of every time you've ever sent a text and had it misinterpreted. It's so this identification property is a power. It's a genuine, useful power. But we're not wielding it properly most of the time. We started wielding it as part of play. Our parents, who were trapped in it, started trying to direct that attention to get us more in line with their ideologies. And then before we knew it, we were just trapped in a prison of our own making. So what is meditation? Meditation is an invitation out of the entire system. Right now I'm working with a group of people, and there are a few people who are involved in meditation practices. And some of them come from the field of counseling and psychology. And counseling and psychology is borrowed a lot from the field of spiritual practice and meditation. And it's interesting, like what's meditation to them and what's meditation to me are very, very different. What's meditation to them are more things that I would consider contemplation. So it's little awareness techniques to kind of shift, and bring your awareness back into your body. Little techniques. I shouldn't say little techniques. They're not insignificant. I don't mean, I actually mean short. They're like quick techniques. They've got their place and they're very, very important. But they're all designed, when you really look at them, they're all designed to pacify the personality in some way. They're all designed to change how your body feels, to help you get a better night's sleep. They're designed to make real changes to your physiology. I mean, you will have decreased stress hormones if you practice these things. So it's all valid and all important. But it's not what I would call meditation. These are techniques that are really designed to calm down the personality. Very valuable. But meditation, to my knowledge, is to stop pacifying the personality. Meditation is a shift of attention away from the personality. To me, it's not going back to the personality and kind of balancing it out with visualizations. It's taking time to say, okay, I'm going to stop feeding that system of stories right now. I'm going to go ahead and let them squiggle around, and I'm going to wait until they die down enough for me to see who I am without them. So meditation, the way I teach it, is about discovering your true self. And it's about actually freeing yourself from the prison of the stories. It's just interesting, I've been kind of exposing myself to these other techniques, and it's just interesting how different people's ideas of what meditation can be. But what we're teaching here is freedom, even if it's just temporary. And the value of that is that when you are stuck in your system of stories, depending on how messed up they've become, they become like a filter for your entire energy and feeling system. It's the reason you don't feel good so much of the time, because your energy is kind of moving through this filter, through this prism, if you like, of stories that carry things like anger, fear, anxiety, all kinds of things that you want to have happen, all these things that you're still upset happened, all these expectations that you have of what a moment is going to look like or needs to look like. And so things don't flow properly in our bodies. And over time, it ages us. It makes us start to feel sick inside. That's why people who meditate age slower, because at least once every day, they're stepping out of that filter and letting life flow through them uninhibited, unfiltered, unhindered. My teacher used to say unfettered. That was the word she always said. But it's the truth. It's the reason you sleep better after these classes. It's the reason that you feel better after these classes. Because you just had time in truth, time in that space that just isn't stuck with all your stories. And things can flow. So it's important that we start to recognize the areas in life where we are misidentifying, unnecessarily identifying with things that are harmful to us, anxieties that are harmful to us. This requires that we really stop game playing with ourselves, to take an honest look at what we're doing, to take an honest look at our hang-ups. All of those things that you think have to be a certain way, it's because you are misidentified with some role. It's not because they have to be that way. They don't have to be that way. You can seriously set major cycles in motion in your life that then you have to tend to. If you're stuck in a system of stories. So, again, this is all stuff I expect that all the people in attendance here know, but for some reason I just cannot help but say it tonight. So I apologize if that sounds redundant. But you are stuck in a system of stories. It's a labyrinth. It's a maze. And the purpose of meditation is, rather than making you constantly trial and error every possible path life has to offer within that maze, we're lifting you out of the maze. The air is clearer up here. It's healthier. The more time you spend up here, the better you're going to feel. And that's what meditation is about for me. There's a question here. So someone's asking, is meditation the only way out of the maze of stories? Yes and no. So the only way that I am aware of out of the maze of stories is to spend a period of your life removing your attention from the stories. So I am willing to accept the possibility that someone could do that with art. Someone could be so given to the sculpture that they are making. And if they are doing it in service, maybe, to something that is not a part of their personal story, that they could find themselves in spaces where everything is flowing as if they are out of the story. The beauty of meditation is when you do it, you know you're doing it and you know why you're doing it, which means that it's yours. You don't have to step into some specific lane. It's something that can happen while you're washing the dishes. It's something that can happen while you're pulling weeds. It's something that can happen while you're sitting on a cushion. But to the extent that all of that is meditation, I would say yes, meditation is the only way out of the maze of stories. Because everything else is contained in the world of stories. But it doesn't have to be my meditation. It doesn't have to be watching the breath. It can be anything, literally any point of focus or any mantra. But as soon as you turn it into a storyline, and that can even be a religious storyline, you are back in the maze of stories. But religion is a much cleaner series of pathways in that maze, and their ultimate goal is to take you to a place where you're just so given in devotion that you are now meditating and you are stepping out of that maze. So ultimately, at the end of the day, meditation as I'm defining it, to my knowledge, is the only way out. But that can be meditation on a movement of the body, like Qigong. That can be meditation on a piece of pizza. As long as when your mind is ready to leave that piece of pizza, you gently bring it back. Gently bring it back. Okay? That system of stories is what's pulling you away. So anytime you choose a point of focus and sustain that choice, and don't let the system of stories pull you, you stop feeding the energy that goes to that system of stories. And you find yourself slipping into silence and into moments of meditation, which eventually extend themselves. And then a moment comes where you just decide you can abide there, and then you'll spend a much longer period of time there. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay. A lot of people fight against meditation. A lot of people, I remember over the years when I taught this class live, I would always get students who would say, I'm not practicing your meditation, but I'm going for walks and I'm being meditative on the walks and and they would say, is that okay? And my answer would always be, well, there's nothing wrong if that's your meditation. But then ask yourself, why can't you sit the way you're being asked to sit? It's like you're being instructed in this very specific way, and there's something in you saying, no, nope, not going to do that. I'm going to do this. There's a story there, right? There's something that you are identified with that is saying no to one thing and yes to another, So it's tricky. You have to really stalk yourself. You have to really watch yourself and just notice when you start to get triggered or when, the walls kind of come up. Those are usually the moments to do the thing you're uncomfortable with and to do it as a meditative practice. Because what you're coming up against is one of the walls of your prison. All these little stories about where you can and can't go, that's what you can and can't become. And it's all a lie. There's no truth in any of it. So I just personally, and I guess I'm biased, but I can't imagine a more important skill to master than the ability to leave that prison. Even though there are rooms in there that you like, there are plenty of rooms you don't. The more time you spend out of it, the more you realize how much control you actually have over those walls. And so you can turn this system of limitations back into a paradise. That's what true Kabbalistic teachings are about, really. I mean, I don't know if anyone describes it quite like this, but, they're trying to restore the Garden of Eden. And what that looks like, at least from our perspective, is spending enough time out of the system of stories that you can come back in, see a bunch of the stories that are just putting up unnecessary limitations, and weed them out. And just keep doing that until even the system of stories is a beautiful garden instead of a limiting prison. You know, it's not about not participating in life. Life is a gift, but it requires an amount of skill that I just don't know a lot of people who have that level of skill yet, you know? But if you are listening to a teaching like this, you have the ability to start gardening that prison into a garden. But you can't do it without the meditation. I don't see how you would even do that. You wouldn't have the clarity. You would still just think, everything needs to be certain ways. You know, you would think, oh, well, I can change this, but I can't let go of that person over there. That person, I mean, obviously I need them in my life, even though they make everything miserable. Or, it's all, I want this, but I can't. I want this, but I can't. You need the clarity to start realizing that there is no I can't. There is no I can't. It's your garden. It's your prison, but it's also your garden. And you can put up whatever walls you want. Weed whatever you want. Sow whatever you want. You can choose to take on difficulties. I make that choice sometimes. Because, after a while, to just have a pretty garden, so what? you know? So what? It needs to be helping people. So I connect to people and I let their suffering into my life a little bit. And when you're trying to build in a way where you have to collaborate with other people who are themselves stuck in a prison, it's very difficult to find good help in a garden. People come with their baggage. So it's challenging, but you can get to that point where you are doing your part, where you are living with that integrity and that wakefulness at all times. So that when, one of the people that you've let into your garden is making things awful, you can sit there and make a conscious choice of how far you're going to let that go. Are you going to let that stimulate anger or compassion? Are you going to, allow that to victimize you? Or are you going to put up the boundaries that you need to put up to make sure that doesn't happen? And are you going to do it with so much understanding for that person in your heart that you can do it without crushing them? So it would be no fun if the garden didn't constantly mess itself back up. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. I heard when this, and then I didn't hear the final clause. Are you just asking if that's how it works? Okay. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to, just for the recording, I'm going to say this because it's a good question. So there, she's basically saying, okay, so is it like, when you step out of the maze of stories and you gain that clarity and then you come back in, you're just trying to constantly be aware that you are in a maze of stories and, just constantly aware that you are in an illusion. And and so yes is the answer to that. But what that looks like, for starters, you've experienced this before. Okay? This is like Any of you who have ever spent any time meditating with me, you get to that place where everything is just clear and you're comfortable. And then you step back into your night. And if you're paying attention, there'll be that first offense, right? That first twinge of crap about something that happened earlier or something you have to do tomorrow or something. You can recognize that first story that comes back in. And how you deal with that makes a big difference in how long you can sustain your awareness. Do you remember that movie, What Dreams May Come? Where I think I've probably overused this analogy, but so Robin Williams' wife commits suicide and she ends up going to what, I guess what we would call hell. But, hell is not really a punishment. It's just a place that people go when they just can't look at anything but their own suffering. And, Robin Williams, ever the protagonist, ends up in this heaven realm. But he finds out that his wife is suffering in this hell realm. And so he is going to travel there to go save her. And what everyone keeps saying to him is, you can't do that. You can't do that because you will get stuck there forever. And he's like, why? And he's like, because whatever you look at just traps you, So for you to go down there and look at her misery with her, you are going to basically, it's going to overtake you and you will slowly get sucked into her story. You'll get sucked into the stories of that realm. And it's funny just how much that's already happening to everybody. As soon as one story starts to come in and you get that twinge, if you don't instantly address it, if you don't instantly put yourself back up to the top of the mountain in your meditative state and recognize, okay, a story's trying to get back in, I'm going to let that story be in the space, but I am not going to react to it at all. If instead you pull that thread even a little bit, even subconsciously, it's connected to every other set of stories in your web. And you will pull it all back in. So I think on the spiritual path, what this looks like, for a long time, you are getting sucked in and then pulling yourself back out. Getting sucked in and pulling yourself back out. And you learn so much from that process because you come to see, like, when you are out of it and you are not looking at it, everything that was problematic about the problems isn't there. Okay, I mean, what's problematic about it is your attention upon it combined with the meaning that you've assigned to it. And that's all your system of stories. And that meaning that you assign to things, that's a huge component of the story. They have that expression, nature abhors a vacuum. Nature's always trying to fill in the empty spaces. Well, humans hate vacuums too. Whenever there's a meaning vacuum, you fill it in. And what you fill it in with is almost always a product of your fears. Because evolutionarily, that's how you have designed yourself to be safe. But so the majority of reality is space. And you fill in all that space with your fears. And that becomes this mesh of stories that if you pull even one thread, the whole thing comes screaming back in. So I think in the early stages, before you really wake up, before you have that awakening where everything just kind of flips and suddenly you always know what you're looking at, it's really important to develop a dedication to the process. For me, it was like, I'm going to show up no matter what. I am going to drive 8 hours to wherever my teacher is speaking. And then as soon as I can, I'm going to go move up there and I'm going to live near her. And I will drive 7 hours to a place where I can make my living and then drive back, you know? But it's like that part of you that says, I know this is important. I know how easy it is to forget that this matters. So I am going to decide right now that I am always going to honor this in my life and I'm going to show up for it every single day, even when I don't want to, even when it's not working. Because that process then puts you in this learning phase where you fall down and get up, fall down and get up, fall down and get up. And that is how you strengthen your relationship with reality. Because you really start to want to stop falling down. And so you start paying attention to, okay, what's the first step in falling down from this? And that's where all your learning happens. You can't get that from a book. You can't get that from me. That just comes from your practice. So again, you know, these are teachings I feel like I've given you guys before, but for some reason they just, I don't know, they need to be here tonight. So hopefully there's something good happening with that. I have talked a long time. Does anyone have any questions? And if not, we should go back into meditation before we end. Okay. All right. So we're going to give our attention back to the breath because the breath is outside of our system of stories. And when you feel your system of stories trying to pull you back in, you're just going to return to the breath. You are only going to feed your breath with your attention. Nothing else. Let yourself slow way down. Too much racing. To get out of the maze, you have to be timeless. Absolute patience. Here and now. Any parts of you that are still spinning, let them fall to the earth. Just let them sink. Slow down. Let go even deeper. Let that patience reach your heart. Let it seep in. Okay, everyone. Good job. Are there any more questions or anything before we close up? Okay. All right, I'm going to let you all get back to your nights. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will be here again next week. Have a good night. Thank you. Thank you.